DevilNeverCry.
Right, what is up everybody? It is me, DevilNeverCry, and we are back with another video, and as the title of today's video suggests, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy 16 and the latest trailer that just dropped. As many of you know, Final Fantasy 16's combat director, Ryuta Suzuki, was actually one of the combat designers that worked on DMC5, among a myriad of other Capcom titles in their 20-year stint at the company. And quite honestly, looking at the gameplay and comparing them to some of Square Enix's other takes on action, the experience definitely shows. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a more in-depth look at this trailer, trying to dissect and analyze, potentially go frame by frame, and see just what we can learn from the gameplay and its UI. With all that said and done, let's dive right in. Right, so here we are with the Dominance trailer, kicking things off old school as they normally do with these trailers, scrub-throughs I suppose. We are listening to the version with the Japanese VO voiceover, just because it was the one with the greatest clarity and bitrate I could find to download. As we have the fantastic graphical fidelity on the topic of graphics. Square have really outdone themselves, especially compared to the original reveal. So we see the summons, classic Ifrit. Bahamut as well, which I was surprised to see. We're going to see some Mega Flare later from what I remember. Titan, of course. And who else could it be other than Square Enix, you know? Beautiful moon. Really love the moon motif, don't they? But we're going to get into our first snippet here. Now this is interesting. This is really interesting. This UI and the way that it's spaced out really reminds me of a fighting game. Particularly because obviously having the protagonist health bar in the top left corner is pretty standard, but having the enemy health bar up at the top as well is something you don't really see every day. And it's important to note that this looks like it's going to be pre-time skip, I believe, just looking at how the protagonist looks in terms of their attire and how young they look. And I wonder if this UI is going to... well, we'll come to that. Something else I do want to bring attention to is this possibility of switching modes here, which we're going to see later on in the trailer, but it looks like you can toggle that with the left bumper there, or the L2 button, left trigger, whatever you want to call it. And I believe this is going to be some form of mini-boss, I think. I don't think it's going to be, you know, something that happens every single fight. Could you imagine if every single encounter you get to, there's like an interesting cutscene to launch you in? Probably cinematic, wonderful the first playthrough, but on repetitive playthroughs, but to be honest, by the end of the game, you're probably going to get sick of it if that's the case. But this is, you know, no-brainer, some sort of mini-boss or boss. So we have our level here, level 18. We're going to have our health pool up here. And what's interesting to note is the perks up at the top there, which if we let this play out just a little bit more, we're going to see what I mean by the perks here. So first of all, bringing our attention to the bottom left corner here, we have where it shows the potions, high potions, and strength tonic mapped to the D-pad. And of course, they're going to be used in real time. Whether or not they are immediate or they take some sort of time to go into effect, like, for example, in Dark Souls, the Estus drinking animation, which obviously leaves you vulnerable, who knows? But what is interesting is that strength tonic at the bottom there. And if you look over here, I'd imagine this perks bar right at the top above the health bar is, I believe, where it's going to show the effects of your perks and essentially how long you've got for them until they run out, if that makes sense. Interesting the way that they've decided to go for this. I mean, it makes sense from a UI perspective, getting it out of, you know, the action, if that makes sense. And something else I want to touch upon before we move into some of the other cooler gameplay bits is the fact that they've got the protagonist's name here, Clive, which is an interesting name for a protagonist, but, you know, one of the more, I guess, normal names, I guess. But this has so far been a game that's rumored to only have one party member, which is to say it's not really a party if it's one person, right? One single protagonist, one playable character. But would you, if that were the case, would you really have their name pop up every time? You know, just some food for thought. You know, hopefully we do get access to more playable characters in some form of a party, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So getting into the main swing of things here, we've got a jump button. Fantastic. I'm glad they really decided to add in a jump button. After all, a combat designer from DMC5 working on this game and the no jump button. Could you imagine? absolute blasphemy. But we know that other games like Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't have a jump button, and it was sorely lacking in that game. Obviously, FF15 did, but that game's combat system, in my opinion, was a bit of a mess. We also have our standard attack button here, and we're going to have the fire button here, which is interesting because if you look casually at the UI, whenever the player, whoever's playing, the developer's playing, you'll see them tapping that fire button because you can see it throb here as or pulse every time the button is pressed. And what happens is the protagonist goes from like a standard set combo straight into a fire-based attack, which I think is a really cool way for them to link the magical elements or the magical attacks, which typically would just be their own set standard animation, for example, in something like FF15, into something that links organically into a combo. You can even see Clive here has his sword engulfed in flame and then throws out a fire attack. And imagine that's probably going to get more powerful and more, you know, flary and wild, depending on what level of magic he's using, whether it's fire or Fire 3, I think it was called in FF7, or Fireger, whatever you want to call it. Imagine flare. Imagine how insane flare is going to look with the particle effects. That is, of course, if flare is magic in this game. And you also have the Phoenix Shift button, which I think comes into effect in this next sequence here. So Phoenix Shift here works, I believe, looking at this, works as a... The right term I'm looking for here is not multiplier, but it's a button changer, to put things into perspective. You hold down the right trigger, and it essentially changes the function of triangle and square here into their own special attacks, which you can see Clive here as he uses what looks like the rising flames and literally sends the enemy careening upwards, which I think is pretty cool. So you've got your standard attacks. I'd imagine you've got your standard set combos, and you've got the triggers that you can hold to essentially weave in and out of different attacks, which also includes things like magic, which is pretty cool. I wonder how dodging comes into effect, but we'll get into that in a second. As you can literally see here, we are awarded, the player is awarded for 3 precision dodges, which is pretty cool. And we've got a counter, which is great. So there is a just dodge along with a opportunity for a riposte, which is pretty cool. You can see here it also says lunge and then burst shot, which we're not quite sure what that necessarily means in the context of the game, but it seems as though the different actions you take will be tallied up, and potentially this might be some form of combat or engagement ranking system, and that perhaps you're essentially, whenever you're done with an encounter, the better you do, the more of these you rack up, the more XP you'll get at the end of that specific enemy encounter. But that is just potentially something that we're currently spitballing. We're not sure. Will break here might be simply just like breaking an enemy's guard, which I think is cool. And then you've got the Aconic Strike, which obviously the Acons are the titans or the summons of this game. Shouldn't say titans, the summons of this game. And I believe having the ability to wield their power, of course, and which ones you specifically have access to, is story driven. Maybe it's a case of collecting summons and then not only being able to summon them for massive like special summon attacks, but being able to harness their power in normal combat, and obviously them having their own sort of multipliers and effects and attacks and whatnot, which potentially help you take care of enemy weaknesses. You know, if you're struggling against an encounter with some enemies which aren't weak to, for example, fire, maybe you'll have Rama as a summon. Maybe the enemies will be weak to lightning, and you can switch and you can deal out just a lethal dose of damage. Classic ARPG thing, having all the numbers pop up on screen. I'm hoping that at some point, maybe those are toggleable, and you can get them to toggle on or toggle off. They don't seem too egregious now, but I'd imagine with some larger attacks, you can see them pop up quite larger here. That's fine. We've got the enemy health bars, enemy levels. That's all pretty self-explanatory, and that's just standard action RPG things. So let's press onwards and get to more of the gameplay snippets. Cutscenes are fantastic. Right, okay, so getting on to what I was talking about, iconic attacks. If I can just pause real quick. Ooh. So we see here, obviously, the protagonist is able to jump. Fantastic. Air combos in a Final Fantasy. Amazing. So you see here we've got Phoenix. I believe that is Garuda, who gives you the wind element. Obviously, you have Arrow, which is awesome. And I believe that is Titan, which, as the color scheme and the name implies, I think they use earth magic. So we're taking care of some orcish mesmerizers here, and we see the protagonist use arrow magic to launch the enemy upwards into the air. It seems they switch into the Akon mode, and they have access here to Wicked Wheel and Gouge, which they didn't normally have. Which again, the trigger acts as a bit of a multiplier and essentially allows them to do different attacks. And you can see here the different form of weapon, which I'm not quite sure what you'd call that, like a ground claw. But then it looks like mid combo they hit L2 and they switch to a different Akon, which is great. So not only do you have multipliers you can switch on the fly, you also have the Akons that you can switch as well. And what's important to note here is that whenever they switch Akon, they obviously switch which multiplier they have access to. So it doesn't look like you're going to have, for example, Phoenix equipped and then have access to Garuda's moves, for example, which obviously makes sense. And they hit them with the ground pound, and they absolutely just lambast the enemies here. And you can see a build-up here, and I'm wondering if this is like a limit break gorge, where perhaps you have access to the singular individual bars. There's like mini limit breaks you can use, and then once you have all three, you can use like the big massive fuck off move. Not quite sure. Stone Jailer got we've got a stagger. We've got the stagger coming back into effect here. The one mechanic that I hope they'd stray away from since Final Fantasy VII Remake, or if they do have it, hopefully the combat's not so like heavily centered around it. But we see Odin here equipped, which is pretty cool. And we've got, I believe, Gungnir, I want to say, is the Lance of Odin, this is a really cool fucking like combo, might I add. I love this dark blue red effect. Incredibly edgy, but amazing. But then this is what I was talking about, like the number orgasm, like just fucking multipliers and big thick numbers everywhere. Which, like these numbers absolutely cover this enemy. So who knows when they're going to be out of their like recovery animation. As we cut back into a cutscene, and then we have Shiva here. And we've got Cold Snap, Blizzard, of course. Do we see what Odin had? Let's go back. Did we see what Odin had? No, we didn't. So Odin here, of course, has got a counter. I'm not quite sure what that counter's for. I'd imagine it's for the amount of enemies killed, and perhaps that's a counter that goes up depending on... Oh, no. It seems to be based on the amount of hits and damage that you do in the rapid succession that seem to build that up. Maybe that's the key to summoning Odin for the big massive move he does. We can't see what magic is tied to Odin here, which is interesting. I'm curious. No, I do think that. So we've got Shiva here who has Blizzard, but then they also have Thunderstorm and Pile Drive here as their special effects as they're fighting a curl. So this is also something interesting, and this basically confirms that standard regular enemies here have a standard small health bar, and then the mini bosses and main bosses tend to have the massive bars at the top here to rival the player. They even got the Diamond Dust multiplier, and this is a really cool move here. This really reminds me of Cerberus. Those of you that have played DMC will know, which is cool. And we've got what is that, a takedown? A gambit counter. Right, so this looks like you can knock enemies out of attacks or attack animations with a well-placed attack. So you can see this is going absolutely wild. And the curl in the background is in the middle of an attack animation. You can see it just over there. That's when the attacks clash and they get hit with a gambit counter. They take a sizable chunk of damage and they seem to be open and vulnerable to successive attacks here. And that's when they're hit with the takedown, which doesn't seem to be an actual takedown. I think it just takes on a massive chunk of health. That, I'm betting, is the stagger bar, but I wouldn't bet my life on it just yet. As we see the two armies come head to head and clash. People being torn to bits. Square have not been shying away from showing blood ever since Stranger of Paradise. Right, and then the protagonist here seems to have grown up considerably. That is Rama, I believe. They still have Phoenix equipped. Yeah, curious. So they're fighting Hugo Kupka there, who perhaps, judging from the smoldering attire, maybe their Akon is Ifrit or Ifrit, depending on how you want to pronounce their names. Ooh, come to a heavy clash there. Titan's massive. Shiva looks absolutely amazing. They're fighting head to head. Bahamut joins the fray along with Odin, which is wild. Akon of Fire, they're called here. It's interesting. We know it's Ifrit, but maybe the protagonist doesn't at this point. Phoenix there. Looks like they got hit with an absolute bukkake of flames. Jeez, a barrage of just heat. Yeah, that's GG. So maybe this is a fight you're supposed to lose, considering like they've whittled down Ifrit to a sliver of their health, and then they basically get the Zenkai boost and wake up, got Ultra Instinct, and just smack them to bits. But I'm curious as to what this is. Like, these are obviously set pieces that happen, and I'm wondering whether these are like segments where we take control of the Akons, or maybe this is like a grand fight with the protagonist against the Akons, and if you want to do like boost like a stack of damage, perhaps you can summon the Akons on your side in. Rama, Diamond Dust. Were they fighting Liquid Flame? They were fighting Liquid Flame. Not quite sure who that would be. Phoenix? Maybe Phoenix is Liquid Flame? Not quite sure. Garuda. Damn, Ifrit took a massive attack there. They look like they lost an arm. Bloody hell. Yeah, blown off. Blown to smithereens. Jeez. And Mega Flare. Mega Flare looks amazing. Odin looks wonderful too. One of my favorite summons from Final Fantasy VIII. And well, Bahamut's one of my favorite summons from the series of all time, actually. You know what this game needs? This game needs Doom Train. When are Square going to be brave enough to bring back Doom Train? That is a pretty cool cutscene there. Mega Flare being just deflected by just Odin's sheer might. But they're really giving us a good sense of scale with the Akons here. Something that they really tried to do with FF15, I feel, but just like as big as they were and as cool as they were, they didn't really show us or give us a sense of scale, because they didn't really show us doing anything to the bloody environment. As the classical FF motif kicks in, beautiful Amano artwork here for the logo. One of my favorite things about Final Fantasy in general is just the fact that they always have, regardless of whether you like the game or not, they always have just an amazing logo. So simple just to have the text, but then the art around it speaks volumes. And there's the protagonist looking edgy AF. Right, that is Phoenix. I'm not quite sure if that's supposed to be Ifrit or not. I want to say it is, but at the same time, I'm not 100%. As we see them tackle. Oh, hold on. No, hold on. That's Ifrit on the left there. I'm not quite sure what this is, but I think that's the beast we just saw on the logo. Summer 2023. Can you believe it? So that is my analysis of the Final Fantasy XVI Dominance trailer. I cannot wait for this game. It looks absolutely fantastic. I'm curious to see how responsive this combat system feels. I think most of you will agree that action RPGs and action games in general live and die by how responsive and fluid the combat really feels. Let me know in the comments down below if there's anything that you saw that I just so happened to miss when looking through this trailer, as well as your thoughts on FF16 overall, as I know a lot of you, or some of you, may not be all too pleased with the movement from turn-based to full-time, real-time, hard action. If you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing, as it all helps out the channel. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.